Yeah, so thank you for being here for the Colorado Stream Management Plan Peer Learning Network peer call. Today, let's see here. There we go. Today we will be focusing our call on who is and who could be at the table for your planning process. Before we jump into content and the agenda in full, I'd love for you to take a moment in the chat to share your organization, the native lands from which you're joining, and if you're comfortable, your preferred pronouns. For those of you who just joined, my name is Chelsea Silva. I'm with River Network, and I am calling in from the native lands of the Ute, Cheyenne, and Lipan Apache people. My pronouns are she, her. So please take a moment to add in on the chat. And I will address this in a minute, but normally we have folks just from Colorado on our calls, but today we have people from all over the United States, and I will talk about that in a minute, but I'm really excited to have this call be open to the broader network at River Network. For our call today, please use the chat for questions. And at the end, we have a 1-minute survey. It really is 1 minute. I'm not just saying that. And we would love for you to take that survey to provide input and help us improve our call. So stick around. And if not, here's the link if you have to jump off early for you to provide feedback. Great, it's good to see some familiar faces and some new folks chiming in. So thanks again for being here. Just some background, because I know not everybody knows as much about River Network, but we are a nonprofit with the goal of strengthening a transformational network of water justice and river advocates. We just completed our most recent strategic plan. There's the link if you'd like to read that. But we have 3 primary focus areas, and most of the work I would say that I focus on is in the healthy, resilient rivers focus area, where I am helping to support local coalitions who are working to restore their rivers. So feel free to learn more about that by going to our website. River Network as an organization has free and premium memberships, and just with the free one, you can get access to trainings like this that are network-wide, peer calls. We have online community in hosted on Mobilize, and there are, I can't remember how many people are on that community, but it's upwards of 500 plus members. And so if you're not a member already of that community, I strongly recommend it. It's a space for you to ask others questions about, if you're interested in a specific topic. It's a place to kind of crowdsource and learn more. And it's a place where you're going to learn about different grant opportunities. It's a really cool spot. So I really recommend checking that out and learning more. And if you're not subscribed to River Voices, that's another neat thing that we do. It's an online e-newsletter, and we just came out with one recently that you should check out, because it focused on some case study research we did in the Western United States, focused on building collaboratives to leverage federal funding. I wanted to, as I mentioned, sort of highlight the Colorado Stream Management Plan Peer Learning Network. This is a network that is for folks in Colorado who are working on stream management plans, and it's a space for sharing information, problem solving, and peer learning. And I mentioned at the beginning that normally our events are kind of focused and kept internal so that we can, build this Colorado-based group that is working together. But we decided to open up this particular peer call to our broader network at River Network. So today you'll notice that there are people from all over the nation chiming in. And we just felt like this topic in particular was one where we could learn a lot from others throughout the nation. And so that's why we wanted to open it up. And so for folks who come to our Stream Management Plan Peer Learning Network events on the regular, please welcome folks from across the nation. And thank you for those of you who are new for coming to this event and learning what's happening in Colorado. And we're excited to learn from you too. Our agenda today, I have a few announcements, and then I'll pass the mic over to Stacy Beaugh with Strategic by Nature. She'll walk us through intended outcomes and agreements for this call, and then she'll do an overview of community engagement. We're actually going to do some breakout groups today, which should be really fun to hear from one another and kind of talk about some of these topics. And then I'm excited to have James Dilzell from the Eagle River Watershed Council, he's the executive director, share their experience as a Watershed Council in doing community engagement and some of the challenges and like exciting things that they've been doing. We'll come back to a full group discussion and Q&A, and then we'll wrap it up. So let me just go through some of these announcements today. If you're in Colorado and you're working on a stream management plan, I'm excited to share that we have 2 field trips coming up this summer that we would be excited to have you join. The first will be on the Front Range, hosted in Castle Rock, Colorado on May 24th and 25th. And that's going to focus on West Plum Creek, which has an active stream management plan happening there, and River Network's actually pretty involved in that, so I'm particularly excited about that, just to kind of share from my perspective as somebody somewhat new to stream management planning. And then in August we have our West Slope field trip in Gunnison, and we are excited to be working with the Upper Gunnison River Water Conservancy District on that field trip. So these field trips will be focused on learning skills related to river health indicators. You'll get some interactive learning. You'll also have Stacy here to help shepherd you and get you prepared to be the best facilitator you can be. And so the save the date will come out soon, but I just wanted to flag that we're going to have those field trips coming up. We also, as you know, have an evaluation underway for this peer learning network. We're working with Point B Strategies, and you probably have received an email from me or a couple asking you to take a survey. Please do that if you haven't. We're really hoping that this evaluation can be informed by the people who we're serving. So please take that survey. I know it's another survey, but it shouldn't take you too long, and we really appreciate it. My last 2 updates or announcements are just to sort of flag that Colorado Water Conservation Board has a couple of grant opportunities open right now, and I know some of you probably you're very aware of this, but coming up on July 1 are the grant deadline for the Colorado Water Plan grants, and recently, CWCB has hired regional program managers for these grants. And if you haven't met these folks who are they're arranged by basins, you should reach out to them because they're a huge resource to help you navigate questions related to the grant program. The other grant program that has rolling applications are the federal technical assistance grants, and those again are for helping you to leverage federal dollars for project implementation. And there's kind of 2 buckets of money, and one is for you to hire your own consultant to help you create a grant application for federal funding sources. The other is a bucket of money where CWCB will provide you with support with their own group of consultants that they've hired. But you should definitely check those out because those dollars are going to go fast, and now is the time to go after those federal dollars. I think with that, I'm going to pass it over to Stacy, and thank you so much.
All right, thanks, Chelsea. And one other thing on those roundtable contacts for the water plan grant deadlines, I did just hear, and this is probably happening in a lot of places, but the Southwest Roundtable is asking for applications to be presented at their April roundtable meeting in order to be like officially endorsed by them for the July 1st deadline. So you have a really fast turnaround. So I would encourage reaching out to those representatives ASAP if you're interested in that funding to find out the deadlines. Okay, thanks. Next slide. So hi, everybody. I'm Stacy Beaugh. I'm with Strategic by Nature, and I'm a contracted person on the River Network team. And I'm going to just introduce our topic for today. And I have a couple just like grounding things to talk about before we dive in. The first, and in terms of intended outcomes, like what we're going to expect out of this, like Chelsea said, we have a big audience and we're really expecting a lot of sharing today and learning. The first thing to say is that diversity, equity, and inclusion are very huge and complex topics. So we're doing a lot of narrowing in today and really trying to focus on one component of that, but also understand that it's very easy for all of us to get our minds thinking and really go in a lot of directions with this, and it can feel overwhelming really fast. So we're trying to keep it focused, but are also interested in hearing from you. If you discover something that you want to talk about more or cover in a future training or call, we'd love to work with you to give you some space to be able to do that. Another thing to keep in mind as we go is that diversity is relative. We recognize, just like all of us are different here on this call, no community or stream management plan or approach that anybody's using is going to look like the other. So we're really trying to hone in on what is going on in your community and what's your perspective, and then who can you bring to the table with you to help broaden your perspectives and help meet the needs of your community. And so there's no right answer is basically what we're saying here, and we really want everyone to be open to exploring as we go through this conversation. Learning and reflecting together, that's what we're doing. Our goal here is to give you a lot to think about and have some thought partners. So just keep that in mind as you're going through. Another piece, this is kind of our main outcome, is to reflect on who you're working with in your community, and are there opportunities to expand engagement and strategies to ensure inclusivity or ensure people feel a sense of belonging and are welcome in your planning processes. So next slide. So a couple training agreements. We're going to be mostly in breakout groups for this. And one agreement that I forgot to put on here is when you're in your breakout groups and we're doing the full discussion, it would be great if you could turn on your videos so people can have a face to talk to instead of a black box with a name. So if you want to start gearing up to turn your video on now, that would be really great. We're going to definitely listen to understand each other. Everyone's coming from different perspectives. So really try and ask questions and hear where other people are coming from, and that might help them in their discovery process as well. Be open-minded and suspend judgment. There's no ideas are bad ideas right now, but we're also being respectful and considering our own impact. This is diversity and equity and inclusion can be sensitive and challenging topics for a lot of us. So we want to give ourselves permission to make a mistake, but also own those mistakes as we go, and just be thoughtful about what we're saying and how it could come across to other people. Share from your heart and your personal experiences. Basically, you can talk about what you have the permission or experience to talk about. We don't want people to be inadvertently sharing perspectives that they don't have permission to speak for. Take responsibility for your own participation and learning and growth in this activity today, and take care of your own needs. Since everyone will have their videos on when we're talking to each other, if you do need to step away for a minute, just turn your video off, and when you come back, you can turn it back on so we know that you're there. Can I get a quick thumbs up from folks if you're good with these training agreements? Great, thank you. Okay, next slide, please. So we are going to use the chat box a little bit, so be ready for that. We're going to do some breakout groups. We're going to hear from James and do a full group discussion. One thing I just want to say is thank you so much to Shada with River Network. She basically gave me a lot of these slides that we're using today and really helped us narrow in our conversation. So we really appreciate her willingness to support this ongoing work of the Peer Learning Network. Next slide. Okay, so in the chat box, I want you to take a minute and reflect on your definition of engagement. So what does engagement mean to you? And obviously in the context of planning, maybe not, there's lots of engagement, but in the context of planning, what does engagement mean to you? Type it in the chat and don't hit enter until I tell you to. So I'm going to give you a minute to write that down. Okay, and you can click enter. Great. Let's take a minute and start scrolling through. We have a really cool graphic someone put in there and just kind of see what other people have said. Give you a minute to scroll. Okay. And Chelsea, you can go to the next slide. So just to kind of frame this up, we're going to talk a little bit about, and a lot of you have these answers in the chat, and what engagement is. So engagement is collaborative, relational, long-term, based on mutual interest or mutual gains. It's really a relationship that we're talking about here, and it's a long game. It's not a transaction, which is often one-sided, short-term, or benefiting one person in the situation. Next slide, please. So when we're talking about engagement and who to engage in our conversations and our planning, there's a couple questions that you can be asking. And really the whole point here is relationships are a long game. Engagement is a long game. Let's really be intentional and thoughtful behind what we're doing to set this up and make sure that we're fulfilling the needs of that relationship. And so these are some questions, and these slides are going to be posted. I'm just kind of sharing this to frame up the conversation. So I'm not going to go into each of these in detail, but really thinking through who you are and what you're doing and how you want to be showing up can really help guide interactions, and also what the goals are in an engagement relationship with somebody in your planning process. And then other questions are, who are you trying to reach? This really gets into the diversity conversation that we're hoping you all hone in on today is, who in your community are trying to get at, and how do you currently know that community or don't know that community, and how could you get to know that community? What are the resources you have and what are your limitations? And these are all key in kind of framing up the level of effort and involvement and needs that you have in pursuing that relationship. Next. So additional considerations to think about is, who is convening and organizing, and does that make a difference, benefit or challenge in trying to engage the community you're thinking about? Being realistic about your capacity. This third one is really critical, recognizing that communities are not monoliths. For example, this example is that the Latino community can have lots of shared and diverging experiences. We have a large population of Latinos in Southwest Colorado, and they're from hundreds of different countries around the world. And so making sure have different experiences, immigrant or not, and making sure that you're not just singling out one person, and they'll be quick to tell you that their experience does not speak for everyone and that they are speaking for themselves, just as you should be in these conversations. Same with tribal communities. We work a lot with various tribal communities in the Colorado River Basin, and there's over 30 different tribal communities, and they are all different. And so being really respectful and understanding of that is key. And being prepared for rejection. This is recognizing your power and privilege. You know, people might not be open to engaging with you off the bat, and it really takes building trust and potentially finding people that can carry and help pursue that trust and build that trust with a community that you're trying to engage with. Next slide. Trying to blow through these so you guys have time to talk. And then this slide, I'm just going to point out a couple things that, you know, I said relationship building is a long game, but it's really hard to do this work. It's really easy to work with people you've known and worked with for a long time, and that's your inner circle. But to expand this work to new communities and new people takes time and patience, and that's something to really keep in mind as you're going through this. And relationships are the key to all of this, and whether you're planning or fundraising or any of these aspects that are going to keep your project successful, those relationships are key. So prioritizing your time to dig into those is really important. And we're also working in a different context now, post-pandemic, and there's a lot of really big issues that we're all facing, and something else to think about when you're engaging a community that maybe hasn't been engaged traditionally in your work is they might have other priorities that are competing for their attention, and there may be a lot of big reasons why their time is limited or their interest is limited in engaging with you. Next. Okay, so with that, very fast and quick, just overview of engagement. With that fast and quick overview of engagement, we're going to have you get into breakout groups to kind of talk through this in more depth. So I'm going to put in the chat the questions, and we're going to have you split out into breakout groups, and we just want you to really, introduce yourselves to each other and talk about what community means to you and your planning process. So who are the people that you're trying to engage? What are your goals around engagement? So what does engagement look like to you? What's important? How might you expand that circle? So who are the people that you have at the table, and who are you hoping could be there? And then just think about how you're making sure that that engagement approach is really engagement and not transactional. And what are the opportunities and barriers you see to engagement with those communities that you want to expand to? So really just a discussion. And I think if you've done a lot of this work in your planning, it'd be great to share what you've done and considerations that you've taken on in your area and with other people in your breakout. And then when we come back from the breakout group, we're going to have a quick debrief, but we're also going to hear from James on how they've considered these questions in their work on the Eagle River. And then we'll have some time to talk with him about what you guys came up with, and then also how that relates to what they're doing in the Eagle River. So does anyone have any questions? Chelsea's going to put you in breakout groups, and you're going to have about 25 minutes, and then we will. Welcome back, everyone. Sounded like some really great discussions. I think we have everybody back almost. Let's wait one more minute. Okay. Well, welcome back. We have a couple minutes. I'd love to, we're not going to do full on breakout reporting, but if anyone wants to volunteer and share just a reflection from your breakout group, we'd love to hear it. Like, what was something that you learned or really struck you, or that you hadn't been thinking about before that you'd want to share with the group? And I'll pick on people if we don't get
Mhm.
volunteers. So be prepared for that. Okay, I will pick.
Stacy,
Oh.
Sadie in our group had some really interesting resources to share. Sadie, maybe you could talk about the engagement toolkit that you just posted in the chat.
Sure
Really quick.
can. I was just trying to grab all those
Thank
other
you.
links too. So I work at the local level with the municipality, but we have little fingers in a lot of different areas. There's a big urban ag relationship for us too. So as well as we kind of have a large refugee population in Rochester. So just a lot of different communities to think about when it comes to engagement and inclusion, especially within that and accessibility. So some things that I threw in our discussion, the city of Rochester was a partner with a researcher at University of Minnesota, and over a number of years, he's been developing kind of a process or a design that's called co-design for engagement. And really the most important thing is being able to identify those communities that we talked about. There's a matrix in there if you click on it, and it shows, just an easy visual way to look at who you want to be including in these conversations, because once you get rolling, if you're like, oh, we should invite them and them and them, it can get super long. So really thinking about, if there's a specific project in mind, who is most highly impacted, and within all of those people, who has low access to decision makers. And that's who you really want to go after, and make sure that your co-design process, which also includes compensating people for their time, really targets those communities, and then they reach out to their communities and you meet back. And it's a really great process. We're using it for Resilience Hub kind of visioning right now. The other resources that I wanted to throw in there, I'll put them in and then I'll mute for a second. One of them is just a great example of Engagement HQ. It's a super, super cool platform. I have been trying to look into platforms for 2 years now, and truly this one feels like it's the best. It's also incredibly expensive. So if you can possibly find a partner who already has a license and access to this, use it. It just covers a lot of bases. Yeah, I'll throw that in.
Thanks, Sadie. We'll look forward to seeing those in the chat. Awesome. Anyone else? We have a couple minutes left before James has the control of the floor. Does anyone else have anything they want to share from their group or other resources that would be useful?
One of the things we touched on was engaging second homeowners, which may not be relevant to all watersheds and all plans, but in Estes Valley and here in the Eagle River Valley, we have a lot of second homeowners, and I think the Hudson Valley also kind of touched on that too. And these folks don't live here all the time, they're not super plugged into the community, but they are a part of the watershed and may have the resources to help make a difference too. And Jen had a good idea of, the neighborhoods and the neighbors within that neighborhood have a pretty good idea of who doesn't live there full time. So rather than trying to do mailers or go door to door yourself, like find a champion in that neighborhood who can help you identify those homes, and maybe they can make the connection of friendly neighbor, hey, we've got this thing going on, we want to do a plan, we've got questions, can you chat? So using more of that community connection rather than trying to do broad outreach to these folks, and that will probably get ignored.
Great, thank you so much. Any other reflections?
I'll
And
just
a
share.
reminder. Oh, go ahead, Chelsea. Yeah.
Just one thing that our group talked about was just when you're thinking about the kinds of events and activities that you host or engage in for community engagement, that diversifying the types of events you host will help increase the diversity of the folks that you're actually reaching. A good example was, we talked about having these pub talks where some folks might not be interested in coming to those and talking about whatever watershed planning process. But then if you have like a river cleanup, you're going to have a much broader group of people who come to those. And so making sure that you're thinking about that and thinking about who would actually attend and what those tools what kinds of people you're actually going to bring in through those different things.
Great. Thank you so much. Those are great reflections and resources that I think all of us could probably use in our planning. So with that, I'm going to turn it over to James. He's going to give us just an overview of the Eagle River efforts to engage some of their more diverse community members in their process. And then we'll have questions after he's done. Thanks, James.
Yeah, awesome. Cool, y'all. Well, I'm James Dilzell. I'm the executive director here at the Eagle River Watershed Council. We're situated in the headwaters of the Colorado River Basin, about 2 hours west of Denver. Vail and Beaver Creek are ski resorts here, if those are helpful geographic tags. And we have an incredibly river-centric community. Our choir and our organization feels that very strongly, obviously, but it's pretty easy to see the connection that our river has to our greater community through tourism. Tourism and recreation are our top economic drivers here in the county, and our river really does connect back to all of them, even skiing with snowmaking and water diversions there. We support communities on the Front Range through Trans Mountain diversions, but really recreation is our bread and butter, and tourism. So our water plan was intended, or is intended rather, to look ahead at future conditions and how they will impact community values, and go through certain risk portfolios to understand what these scenarios will look like, whether we have increased population growth. Our valley is projected to double by 2050. We're at about 55,000 full-time residents now. And even in the last few years, it has grown, I would say, catastrophically, but I'm a little selfish and I liked it quieter. A lot of folks moving up here post-pandemic and during the pandemic. So population growth is a huge risk to our community. Climate change is huge. We have, as I'm sure a lot of your watersheds are seeing, incredible volatility with our snowpack, which is what 80% of our water comes from. So this year it looks really good, but rewind about 3 years ago, it was awful. It was a terrible ski year, and we had wildfires in April, which is awful. So we have some of this climate change risk. We have the potential for more Trans Mountain diversions, so water leaving the Colorado River Basin and heading over to the Front Range into the Mississippi River watershed. So entirely consumptive, and we already have one of those in our valley. I think currently it's about 20 to 30,000 acre feet of water that's diverted annually. And there's potential for another 20,000 to be diverted through a new reservoir with water rights that the Front Range has. So that would be a situation we're looking at and are worried about. And then the other thing is taking all of those and putting them together in various forms to come up with how are our community values going to be affected, and how can we mitigate these undesirable future conditions? What do we need to do now so that 2050 we get there and we're not panicking and said, oh, we should have done this 30 years ago. I don't have a slide deck. I figured this could just be a conversation. And one of the things we touched on in our small breakout group was asking the right questions and when to engage folks. Here in the Eagle River watershed, we have a pretty diverse community. So about 20 to 30% of our community is Spanish speaking. And that's just the census. And if you look at our school district, the numbers would be a lot higher, probably closer to 50%. And we also have quite the range of economic power. So we have folks that are extremely wealthy. This is their third, fourth home. Nothing really matters to them. They spend $20,000 a month on their water bill. Then we have folks who maybe live a little further down valley and don't have access to these resources and are worried about putting food on the table for their kids and getting to work on time. So we have a pretty diverse range of folks here in the community. And our vision here at the Watershed Council is that we are not able to fulfill our mission, and we cannot protect our watershed without all of those folks involved. So community outreach was a big piece of our water plan right at the start. With the caveat, I was not here when we started this water plan. We began the process in, like I said, late 2017, early 2018. I joined the Watershed Council in mid 2019, but we do have some good data from folks. We've had some success in outreach, but it hasn't been perfect. So I can share a lot of our lessons learned and what we focused on most. So at the start, actually, I'll pause there. And does anyone have any questions? Awesome. So rewinding to 2018, that's when we got grants from the state to really kickstart this program and do outreach. And we began with some meetings, which we talked about in our small group as well, which are not always the best way to engage folks. No one really wants to come to your really exciting kickoff meeting to talk about what a stream management plan is going to be. So I look back at some photos from those meetings, and it's just stakeholders who have a direct tie to this plan, and maybe a couple of other really sustainability focused community members. But that wasn't how we were going to engage our broader community. So we really took the efforts to bring things to folks. You can't ask them to come to you all the time. You really do need to go out to them and choose the right events and ways to engage. So some of the ways that we did that were school and summer camp drop-offs. Parents, hundreds of parents will be dropping their kids off at another nonprofit for summer camps for childcare. So we had posted up one of our stations there to just talk to those parents as they're coming and going and share, hey, do you have a second to talk to us about your values and your associated risks to our watershed? And another point there is asking the right questions. You can get into the weeds on stream management plans, and there's so much information that you want to know, but the general community, the broader community, doesn't have the context for those questions and maybe even the knowledge to answer. And one of the surveys that we had done in the early stages was very specific to flows, and like, would you want to return to the upper Colorado River or the Eagle River if the flows were 50 CFS? And I am a kayaker, I am a paddleboarder, and I had no context to answer that. I was like, well, I don't know what that portion of the river is when the flows were good, and I had a really good time 2 summers ago when I hit that wave. Like, I have no idea for that. So it's asking the right questions too. And we really narrowed it down to, what are your values? What are your values associated with our water, with our watershed? What do you want to see? Things like wildlife, biodiversity, agriculture, irrigation, golf courses. Thankfully, that was not a high value to our community. Same with non-functional irrigated turf. But asking the right questions is really important. So taking those questions to the folks, whether it's at a school drop-off, we did a couple of church events where we went to churches on Sunday morning with permission from that church to, hey, we wanted to do this. We went to a couple of lunch with locals, which are a really popular sustainability conversation in Vail that engage a pretty diverse group of folks. It's free lunch, so anything with free lunch people will come to. And we also had an event called Sportsman's Expo, which is a lot of hunters, a lot of off-road highway vehicles, ATV folks, folks that don't necessarily engage in the conversation around conservation often. So we had a booth there and talked to over 140 folks and asked them those 2 questions. What are your values and what do you think the risks are to that value? And we did a little dot exercise too. So we had pictures of these values: aesthetics, wildlife, biodiversity, golf courses, snowmaking, recreation, so folks can understand a little bit more what that context was. And we also had those posters translated into Spanish so that we could engage with our Spanish-speaking communities, which I'll touch on a little bit more. But we had pretty good results, and I was proud to see that our community, like I said, did not prioritize golf courses and non-agriculture irrigation. It was really wildlife, drinking water, agriculture, and recreation. Those were our main priorities that our community wanted us to look at. And I think that this set the foundation for our plan quite well. And one of the things we talked about in our small group as well was, when's the right time to engage folks and how do you keep them involved? And we ran into some issues with our water plan. The pandemic one, engagement was nearly impossible for at least a year, if not 2. But another thing that affected our water plan was lack of consensus within our stakeholder group as it related to our models. So that was a 2-year delay in and of itself. So there was no effective way that we were going to be able to keep our general public engaged for this 5-year process. We couldn't ask them to provide feedback all the time. We didn't need to give them updates all the time. But I think that was okay because of the fact that we sort of set this foundation at the beginning of asking the two great questions, what do you prioritize within a watershed? What do you think is the risk? What do we need to look at? And then we can, show very clearly that we carried that value, those risks forward through this model, and have re-engaged them at the end of like, hey, congratulations, you provided the input, and this is the reason that we did the things that we did. Here's our results. Here's what we need to do next. So we had engaged folks this fall in the planning project phase of what do you think we need to prioritize in terms of projects? What can we get done in 5, 10, 15 years to help mitigate these undesirable future conditions? Backing up a little bit to our Spanish-speaking community, unfortunately, here in Eagle County, a lot of our Spanish-speaking community is also a part of the more disadvantaged folks and don't have the resources, live in homes that are very crowded, and this is not something they're thinking about. This is a very low priority to them. They don't even, some of the kids don't even know what the name of the river is that's flowing literally 100 feet from their home. So we needed to figure out a way to make, I would say, authentic connections with these folks. We didn't want to just say, hey, you need to care about this. I have a question for you. That's transactional, as Stacy had mentioned. That's not effective. That's not comforting. And it doesn't really give you the information you need. So we knew that authentic connections need to be made. So one of the things the Watershed Council had already started doing in 2015 was a community float with bilingual guides. We invited a group called Neighborhood Navigators that's no longer in existence and has slowly transitioned to this other group that I'll touch on. But we had partnered with them, a local guiding company that has bilingual guides, and provided a free day on the river with lunch. And this is most often the first time these families have ever done anything like this. They've never had a river recreation experience. So we took those groups and that connection with those larger cohorts, the Neighborhood Navigators and this other group called Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement. And once you gave them the opportunity to have this connection, which we had already wanted to do regardless, we could bring this question to them of like, well, hey, you've gotten to experience the river. Like, what do you think of the river? What are your values now that you've had this experience? And it wasn't this just like, hey, you're a checkbox, you're a member of the community, we need this information from you. So making those authentic connections was really important. And one of the things we've learned throughout the process is in-person is really the only way to go. We've done 2 surveys in the last year with the hope of engaging Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement folks, which is a group that has a mission to break down barriers to outdoor recreation. And we're very plugged in through a variety of events and have this connection with these folks, but no one's interested in taking a survey. We had, I think, 5 people take our survey in September from the Spanish version about what projects we needed to prioritize. And we just wrapped up a water efficiency survey that was open for a month and a half, and I sent 1 billion emails. We had 0. So these online things that are asking, kind of personal questions, a good survey has a lot of demographic questions. That community has no interest in taking the time. It was like a 10-minute survey. And they didn't want to give, what neighborhood do you live in? What is your race? What language do you speak? That's a lot of invasive information that I think a lot of us just don't really think about. But they may have a different situation and are not interested in sharing this with an organization they don't have this personal connection with necessarily. So that was something that we've learned this year is, okay, we have to go back to in-person if we want this community to be engaged in a process that we're doing. And I'm disappointed in those survey results. It was a bummer. I was really looking forward to county and say, hey, we had all of these folks participate. And thankfully, we have the voice of this Spanish-speaking community from the beginning, our foundation, but we don't have a lot of voice here at the closeout of our plan. But it's still worth the investment. And we're still, wrapping up our plan. We just got another grant to do an actual front-facing piece rather than these archaic technical documents. And we're still prioritizing, we need to put this in Spanish. And then I think now I'm thinking, okay, we have to figure out a way to take this back to the community through Eagle Valley Outdoor Movement, through an event that is tailored to that community if we want to engage them, and not just assume they'll read this pamphlet that we email to them. And another lesson learned here that I wanted to share too. Any
James,
questions?
this will
while
probably be the last one, so we have time for
Sure,
questions. So
this can be,
thanks.
we can be done
Well, share your lesson. We want to know
if
now.
I can find it.
it.
Oh. No? Oh, I guess it really is just stay creative. You know, what worked before may not work again. So stay plugged into that, whatever group you want to target, and get feedback from, and make those connections authentic and tangible.
Awesome. Thank you, James, so much. I'm going to turn it to Chelsea to facilitate our Q&A, and then she'll close us out at the end of the meeting. Go ahead, Chelsea.
Yeah, thank you so much, James. I feel like a lot of the components that were talked about in our breakout groups kind of got highlighted through your presentation. And I love this idea of authentic connections, and in person it's just hard to do that without doing it in person. So I am happy to take any questions, and our group's a little smaller now, so I do welcome you to raise your hand. If you'd rather just say your question, you can do that using the reactions tool, or if you'd like to put your questions in the chat. And if there's other reflections from the breakout groups too, please feel free to share those too. Stacy, go for it.
Let's let other people go. I'll go last. Go ahead, Warren.
James, I was curious to hear more about, I guess, what models you used to look at future scenarios, and then what kind of a little more insight into the disagreements that you had regarding the models, and how that all played out.
Yeah, I don't know of a ton of knowledge on the model specifically. I can do some digging and send that to you separately. I'll make a note, Warren. But quickly, the disagreement that was had was really between Trans Mountain diverters and our local community and water providers, and the analysis of impact that a Trans Mountain diversion would have on our watershed is my understanding. And no one was willing to share their model with the other for like 15 months.
Yeah, that sounds about right.
Yeah.
Cool. Thanks, James.
I'll jump in with mine. So James, you talked a lot about kind of the resources that enabled you to have good engagement, like with your Spanish speaking community and others, like you leaned on some partner organizations and that kind of thing. And I'm just curious if there's any, in hindsight, with all the engagement you've done and all the diverse community work you've been doing, are there any like key resources or people or like budget requirements or anything that you would say, like, if you don't have this, you probably won't be successful with engaging diverse audiences or communities?
Yeah, I think the budget is a big piece. Good translation is expensive and really critical, because if someone who is translating who's not a part of that community and is not an expert in water, then it could be lost in translation. Literally, a great example of that is we did a very low budget translation of our waivers a few years back, and we got feedback that it said that their kids were going to die at this school event. So we're like, cool, that's not it. Like, we have to figure out a new way to get this. So translation is really key, and you may be able to do it a little bit less expensive. Our county has been a really good resource. They have recently hired some bilingual staff. I think not for this specifically, but they are available as a resource to organizations like ours for translation, and that's been really helpful. But otherwise, it's pretty costly. I think our executive summary estimate for our water plan, which is about, I don't know, less than 10 pages, was like $4,500 for translation. So the good news is that there are grants available for that, and that folks are pretty willing to pay for that. I think our funding's coming from the state, so I feel lucky with that. The other thing I would say is more staff time. So building more staff time into grants for this outreach is really important. It just takes a lot of time, and to build those authentic connections, you can't just send an email and expect folks to be there. It's really planting yourself in the community and getting involved. So more staff time, which is never an easy thing for watershed organizations.
I just want to mention the state will support projects such as the bilingual stuff. We can do that through our water plan grant and WSRF.
Thank you, Andrea.
Did that come from CWCB? The state
Yep.
funding?
Yeah, Will, I see you have your hand raised.
Yeah, so we are about to start what we're calling a re-engagement process for our SMP. You know, we completed the SMP, we identified priority areas and some priority diversions, but left it open-ended as to what those projects will exactly look like on the ground to make sure that we do have the ability to include different stakeholder perspectives and community perspectives. And James, I really like the idea of, you know, taking advantage of other places like churches, like, you know, summer camp drop-offs. And I was just wondering if you could talk a little bit more about what that actually looked like. You know, were they all one-on-one conversations? Did you have like a table and have like group conversations? I'm just kind of wondering how you structured those.
Yeah, those were really the tabling model, where we had our booth with our couple of posters in multiple languages. We had the sticky dots that you would put on an item at a garage sale and have, you know, explain here's what we're doing, here's the context. What do you think of when you think of rivers? What are your values? So it was a really quick activity. I think folks had maybe 2 or 3 dots to prioritize. And our survey was intended to be, the online survey was intended to be similar to that with voting, but the in-person just worked a lot better. So it was just the kind of informal passerby model of tabling.
And did that lead to any follow-up conversations for you all with those people who stopped at the table?
I think a few folks became more engaged in the stakeholder group, at least at the beginning. They definitely didn't carry through the long delays, but we did have some folks who were like, oh, I didn't know this was happening. Like, I would love to participate, or would love to, you know, take this back to my community. But not a ton. I think we had about 450 folks participate, maybe 420 throughout that outreach process at the beginning. So definitely didn't have like 50 people become more engaged in the stream management plan process, but that wasn't really the intention too. We didn't expect folks to want to be fully plugged in.
Okay, cool, thank you.
James, I was wondering if you could speak to this, you know, the 2 questions that you realized, okay, these are really the basic questions, the questions we want to ask. And you said one was, what are your values? And the other one was, what do you think are the risks to these values? And the first question is like really straightforward to me, like in terms of how you would take that and have it inform your plan. But can you speak to how that second question kind of rolled into your plan?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I mean, to set the context for folks, it was similar, like a photo exercise. So it wasn't this like meta, like, what do you think is going to happen in the future? It was like, well, here are the risks that we know are coming. Like, what do you think is the major one? And some of that was just for us to better understand, you know, where do we need to educate folks? You know, if they think that mining is our biggest risk, maybe we need to shift that and share that, okay, well, actually development and stormwater is constantly a issue within our watershed through our water quality monitoring program. And we need to shift that education from this plan. But I think it was really just to gauge a baseline of what the community thinks. Those risks from population growth and development, diversions, climate change, those were all things we were going to do regardless through this model.
Yeah, thank you. And that makes a lot of sense to me. It helped to help you understand what where are the maybe knowledge gaps, and just like having a conversation can help you have those conversations right then, or even, you know, help you to think about how you communicate and what you how you frame things, how you talk about things. And yeah, that's great. Thank you. Any other questions? Well, James, thank you so much for sharing. I have personally been looking forward to your presentation, and I am walking away from this and those breakout group discussions with a lot to think about. Stacy, thank you so much for setting the stage and helping us get started and having this conversation. I just want to plug that I put into the chat our evaluation. Again, that'll take you 1 minute. And I really especially appreciate your feedback in the open-ended question. If you think that there's other ways we could have done things, or other topics you're interested in learning about related to this or not. And I just thank everybody for being here. And I look forward to sharing out the presentation slides as well as notes from this call with you over email in the next week or so. Anything to close out with, Stacy or James? Or Kim also is one of our team members that's hanging out on the sidelines today, but part of the team.
I'm putting a couple links in the chat from the coloradosmp.org website, some additional links on engaging stakeholders and previous peer call we did on building an engagement plan. I will note that we've self-identified that we could be doing much better in building resources around engaging diverse audiences and helping our planning processes be more inclusive. So if you have resources or additional, you know, just thoughts on that, we'd love to hear them. And you can engage if you're in the peer learning network on Mobilize with those resources, or just email them to Chelsea and I, and we'd love to get those up on our website for people as well. So thank you so much for your time today. And that's all I have. James, do you have any closing thoughts?
I think thank you both for organizing this. This was really helpful for us, even as a group that's close to the end of our stream management plan. I've learned a lot from our breakout groups and some of these questions of what we can do better and some other tactics. So thank you all for doing the work you do and for engaging in this.
And thank you for our national folks that came to our Colorado call. It was really nice to hear some ideas that I don't think I would have heard otherwise. So thank you for being here. And yeah, thanks everybody for coming along. And we hope to see you and our field trips this summer if you're in Colorado. And if not, we'll see you at other events, I'm sure. Take care.
Bye, thanks everyone.